The Kingdom of Dahomey, located in present-day Benin, played a significant role in the transatlantic slave trade from the 17th to the 19th centuries. This powerful West African kingdom became deeply involved in the trade, capturing and selling enslaved Africans to European powers. While often simplified, the institution of slavery in Dahomey was complex and differed significantly from the chattel slavery practiced in the Americas. Understanding these differences is crucial for a nuanced understanding of this dark chapter in human history. Dahomey's participation in the slave trade was driven by economic and political factors. European demand for enslaved labor fueled a lucrative market that Dahomey, with its powerful military, was able to exploit. The wealth generated from the slave trade contributed to the kingdom's expansion and influence in the region. However, it's essential to recognize that the institution of slavery within Dahomey itself operated differently from the transatlantic system it fed. Dahomey's system of slavery was characterized by a two-tiered structure. At the bottom were captives of war, typically from neighboring societies. These individuals were considered the property of the king and could be sold into the transatlantic slave trade. However, it is important to note that even within this group, there were possibilities for social mobility. Some captives could earn their freedom through acts of bravery or service to the kingdom. The second tier consisted of domestic slaves who made up a significant portion of Dahomey's population. Unlike captives of war, domestic slaves were integrated into Dahomey's social fabric and held certain rights and protections. They could own property, marry, and even rise to positions of power within the kingdom's administration. This distinction between captives destined for the transatlantic trade and domestic slaves with some degree of agency is crucial for understanding the complexity of Dahomey's system. Domestic slaves in Dahomey fulfilled a variety of roles within the kingdom's social and economic structure. They worked in agriculture, crafts, and domestic service for Dahomey's elite. While their labor was exploited, domestic slaves were not subject to the same level of dehumanization and brutality experienced by enslaved Africans in the Americas. One striking difference was the potential for social mobility. Domestic slaves in Dahomey could inherit property from their masters, marry into free families, and even purchase their own freedom. Some rose to positions of authority within the Dahomey army or government. This relative social fluidity within Dahomey's slave system challenges the simplistic notion of a binary divide between enslaved and free individuals. Section 5. Dahomey's central role in the transatlantic trade. Dahomey's participation in the transatlantic slave trade was substantial and ruthless. The kingdom's powerful army, including the renowned all-female Agoji warriors, actively raided neighboring communities to capture individuals for enslavement. These captives were then sold to European traders at coastal ports in exchange for goods such as guns, textiles, and alcohol. Dahomey's rulers actively engaged in the transatlantic slave trade, viewing it as a source of wealth and power. They negotiated shrewdly with European powers, seeking to maximize their profits and maintain their autonomy. The kingdom's involvement in the slave trade had a devastating impact on neighboring societies, contributing to instability and widespread suffering. Section 6. The brutality of chattel slavery in colonial America. In stark contrast to Dahomey's system, chattel slavery in colonial America was characterized by its brutality and absolute dehumanization. Enslaved Africans were considered mere property with no rights or protections. They were subjected to horrific violence, forced labor, and the systematic denial of their humanity. The transatlantic journey itself, known as the Middle Passage, was a horrific ordeal. Enslaved Africans were crammed into overcrowded ships, chained together in appalling conditions. Many died from disease, malnutrition, or despair during the long and perilous voyage. Those who survived faced a life of unrelenting toil and oppression on plantations across the Americas. Section 7. A stark contrast, Dahomey versus colonial America. Comparing Dahomey's system of slavery to the chattel slavery practiced in colonial America reveals significant differences. While both involve the exploitation of human beings, the degree of brutality, the absence of any rights for those enslaved in America, and the systematic dehumanization inherent in chattel slavery set it apart as a particularly abhorrent system. The two-tiered nature of Dahomey's system, with its distinction between captives and domestic slaves, and the potential for social mobility within Dahomey, stand in stark contrast to the rigid and dehumanizing system of chattel slavery. While Dahomey's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade was undeniably horrific, it's essential to recognize the complexities within its own internal system and avoid equating it with the horrors inflicted upon enslaved Africans in the Americas. Section 8. Dahomey's economic transformation in the 19th century. The 19th century saw significant changes in Dahomey's economy and its relationship with the transatlantic slave trade. European nations, driven by a combination of humanitarian concerns and economic factors, began abolishing the slave trade. This shift had a profound impact on Dahomey, which had become heavily reliant on the trade for its wealth. Dahomey's rulers initially resisted the pressure to abandon the slave trade, but the decline in demand and the increasing presence of British naval forces enforcing abolition forced them to adapt. The kingdom gradually shifted its economy towards palm oil production and other commodities. This transition was challenging, but it marked a turning point in Dahomey's history, ending its direct involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. Section 9. Conclusion. A nuanced understanding of a complex history. The history of slavery in Dahomey is a complex and challenging subject. While the kingdom's role in the transatlantic slave trade was undeniably horrific, it's crucial to avoid simplistic comparisons with the horrors of chattel slavery practiced in the Americas. Dahomey's internal system, with its two-tiered structure and potential for social mobility, differed significantly from the absolute dehumanization inflicted upon enslaved Africans in the Americas. Understanding the nuances of Dahomey's history requires engaging with its uncomfortable truths while recognizing the dangers of imposing present-day moral judgments on the past. By acknowledging the complexities of this history, we can gain a more nuanced understanding of the transatlantic slave trade and its impact on the societies involved.